A vote postponed again after violence mars what was supposed to be the first peaceful transition of power in 2 decades. Many are asking how the Democratic Republic of Congo will ever choose a new leader. I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's newsmaker is the DRC's election. Following years of delays and controversy, voters in the DRC will have to wait even longer before electing their first new president in 18 years. The Electoral Committee says the vote, rescheduled for this Sunday, will have to be delayed again, as it just can't be organized in time. The lead-up to that decision was marred by violence. Protests broke out in the opposition stronghold of Kinshasa after the governor, a member of the ruling party, ordered a halt to campaigning. Now, police fought back demonstrators throwing rocks, by firing tear gas, and blocking others from entering the city. The crackdown killed several people, and multiple opposition candidates were disqualified. Plus, a fire that some election observers call suspicious destroyed thousands of polling machines. So, will another delay lead to a freer and fairer election, or more political chaos and violence? Shoaib Hassan reports.
It began with the promise of a better future for the Democratic Republic of Congo, but the now delayed general election was looking like a recipe for disaster. Violence has already claimed several lives.
Le peuple congolais a tant souffert.
The Congolese people have suffered so much. We already live in a permanent state of conflict, but a worsening of this situation could be fatal for this wounded population. And so, I think we must prevent this. I think there are many signs today that show very well that the elections will be anything but transparent, credible, and especially peaceful.
Sunday's election was postponed as violence spiraled out of control. The government says it's because of opposition riots, but the UN says it's due to heavy-handed measures by the authorities. These are the key players in the election. Joseph Kabila has been president since 2001. He was meant to leave office in 2016, but has clung to power. Kabila has chosen Emmanuel Ramazani Shadary to head the ticket for the ruling Common Front for Congo coalition. Shadary is a former interior minister and is under EU sanctions for alleged human rights abuses. The main opposition contender was going to be Martin Fayulu, a member of parliament and former oil executive representing the Lamuka opposition coalition. But a recent split in the opposition means there's now another choice for voters, and some are disappointed.
We need to recognise that these people, the opposition, are fickle. They say one thing in the morning and another in the afternoon. It's sad. It shows immaturity on the part of Mr. Tshisekedi.
Felix Tshisekedi has also entered the race. He's the son of deceased opposition campaigner Etienne Tshisekedi. He's running on a joint ticket representing his Union for Democracy and Social Progress Party, along with the Union for the Congolese Nation Party. But the opposition is united in its concern about election day. There are 46 million registered voters, and this will be their first time using electronic tablets to cast votes. That's going to be difficult. Only 9% of households here have electricity. Arsonists also destroyed 7,000 new voting machines last week. Despite the obstacles, the opposition had insisted the election must go ahead.
We can't ask the Congolese people to not vote. It would really leave the way open for President Kabila. I'm not going to talk about Shadary, and so we don't want that because that's not what the people want. We will go to the polls with the people who will have their say, and we will win the elections.
Congo has some of the world's richest natural resources, but its citizens are some of the poorest in Africa. Kabila's time in power has done little to change that. Can an election bring in leaders to deliver a better future for the Congo? Or will the persisting violence continue to prevent real change from coming to the country? Shoaib Hassan, the newsmaker.
Well, to discuss the DRC's election further, I'm joined now from Leicester, England, by Michael Shibangu. He is a political advisor for the opposition leader Moise Katumbi. In London, we have Vava Tampa. He is the founder of Save the Congo. And in Ghana's capital, Accra, we have Kambale Musavuli. He is the spokesman of the group Friends of the Congo. Thanks, all three of you, so much for joining us. Let me begin with Michael Shabangu. First of all, do you think this further delay in the general election is a travesty for democracy, or is it necessary to at least try to ensure a freer and fairer election?
It is a travesty for democracy when you consider that the election in DRC was supposed to be held in 2016. We are 2 years late, and this is inexcusable. It cannot be justified. They had 5 years, they didn't do it. They were given 2 more years to make sure that the election are held on time, but still, they still didn't do it. This is a sign of gross incompetence, totally inexcusable and totally unjustifiable.
Okay, Baba Tampa, are you on the same page?
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to go even further. Look, this was expected. Everyone knew that Kabila does not and did not want to organize election. Kabila doesn't want to organize election because he is frightened of giving up power. He doesn't trust anyone around him, including his own cousin, Emmanuel Ramazani Shadari. That's the reason he doesn't want to organize elections. And this is why from the onset, as a solution, some of us in the civil society organizations or groups in Congo as well as outside Congo, we have been pushing from the onset for a civilian transition without Kabila, without his camp, without the opposition, without any politician whatsoever. A transition of technocrat to be led by a neutral figure, and the figure that everyone agrees on is Denis Mukwege, who, by the way, received the Nobel Peace Prize just a couple of days ago. And that transition to go on to organize election that would be free, fair, transparent, inclusive, and non-violent. Without that transition, we cannot trust Kabila. He has had 5 years, an extra year, another extra year, and the reason he hasn't organized it because he doesn't want to give up power.
Okay.
It's time for SADC to come in and essentially impose that civilian transition on Kabila by force using political will.
Okay, I want to move on to that SADC issue you just spoke of and having them intervene if it's a possibility. But Kambali, let me ask you, at this point, we know there were very questionable issues with the delays prior in the last 2 years. But in all honesty, right now, the Electoral Commission says we are not logistically prepared to carry out this election. Is that fair? And do you expect the Electoral Commission to get their act together enough to ensure that voting can take place relatively soon?
I wouldn't want to repeat what my two colleagues have said. Logistically, of course, it's unreasonable to have the election take place this Sunday. That's clear to everyone. But my colleagues have mentioned already earlier that the fact that for 7 years they have been unwilling to organize elections, 5 years of Kabila's last term and the past 2 years, is clearly showing that they have no intent of organizing free and fair election. But the reason even why the elections are being discussed, are being organized, is really because there is a pursuit from the Kabila regime to seek legitimacy, not from the Congolese people, but from the international community. They do know that those are measures or levers that the international community will look at. Is there democracy? Are there elections taking place? Without looking at the issues that may occur. This happened in 2011. There was a rigged election in 2011, and Western nations legitimized the result of the 2011. And we can also argue for 2006. So now the challenge that we'll face this December 23rd, when it's going to be clear to the population and the international community that election will not take place, will be to make sure that we continue to shine light on the issues, because we know as we speak that security forces are going to harm the population, as obviously they will hit the street, they'll demand the elections take place, and they'll demand that the aspirations is reflected. So that's why it's critical for everyone in the international community to watch what's happening in the DRC.
It's interesting, Kambali, just quickly comment on this, because as you say that, the ICC chief prosecutor said today that there is now a risk of grave crimes being committed in Congo ahead of the next vote. Why do you think she made a point of saying that? It sounds a bit vague, but why would she have said it?
If you look at the historical line for the past 2 years, we've had many Congolese die Teres Kapangala, a young Congolese woman who was killed within a church, coming out for a rally. We have Rosimu Kendi. Just not long ago, we had university students. That was Rodrigue Liwo and Yacine Kimbafu, university student shot and killed at the university campuses. So we know that the security forces are willing to kill their own citizens, of course, using the orders of the commander-in-chief, I would say. I could argue Kabila or even any government official. So we know that this will happen, and this is why this is warning the situation.
Yeah, Baba, quickly, go ahead.
I'm really angry at the international community. I'm incredibly angry at the UK, at the French, at the Americans, the Canadian, the South African, the Swedish, the Norwegian. I'm even more angrier at SADC leaders because we have known this. And even more, I mean, when the chief prosecutor of the ICC says more crimes could be committed, I wonder whether or not she knows that crimes were committed in Kasai. We have an entire province right in the heart of Congo in Kasai, which has been ransacked by Kabila's people. And we are talking about 1.5 million people being displaced. We're talking about over 4,000 people killed, including two UN expert. We are talking about 90 mass graves found in one province in a space of 1 year. And that province was ransacked simply because they took a stand against Kabila. We are seeing the same situation in Beni. So now when the ICC prosecutor says that, I wonder why is she alluding? Are those not crimes enough? Those were not enough to alert her and other people that the Congolese people are being massacred by their government. How many more people they want to be killed? It's not as if there isn't a solution. That we know what needs to be done. And that is a civilian transition without Kabila, led by someone like Denis Mukwege. The question is why that option hasn't been put into place, why that option hasn't been implemented. That's the question I want to be. I want the international community to answer
Baba,
to. Because our lives
raising Denis Mukwege. What do you really believe he can do? What position should he take? How should he rally the Congolese right now and the international community?
Look, we found ourselves, we have on one side, you had Kabila and his camp, essentially refusing to give up power. And you have on the other side, you have politician opposition figures, some of them in exile, like Moise Katumbi and so on and so forth, some of them on the ground in prisons. So clearly, no politician can unify the entire country to go forward in an election. Because of that, we need someone who is neutral, an independent figure, a moral authority, if you like. And there are two names that had been put forward by the Congolese people. One is Monseigneur Mosengo, and Mosengo has clearly said that he's not going to do it, partially because he's elderly. The only other figure we have who can easily unify both the opposition and the civil society and everyone else, as well as SADC and the international community, is potentially Denis Mukwege. And that's the reason why people like me in civil society and other people have been pushing this idea for nearly a year now to save lives. It's the only way that we can save Congolese lives.
Why aren't we hearing the same
lead us
from
into
him?
A democratic way.
Why aren't we hearing a push from him? Where is his campaign?
Well, for a start, because Denis Mukwege doesn't want to be president. He's not a politician. He's a civil society figure.
You can't say he's the figure that we should be looking at if he's personally not interested.
Well, to say he's not interested is to say sort of we asked him and he said no. I have spoken to him on this. I have been following this guy for nearly 2 years now, essentially to sway him, to convince him that he needs to do this task. And I have reasons to believe that push come to shove, he will do it. He will lead this country forward into a democratic way forward.
I'm wondering if we should host a separate segment on that issue alone. But let me go back to Michael Chibombo.
Certainly.
I mean, I'd like to ask you, Michael, then where you think a real solution actually lies. I mean, Vava's talking about international intervention, particularly SADC should take the initiative to step in and actually get on the ground and do something to ensure a peaceful transition of power somehow. But you're going to hear a number of international players complain that, just as Vava said, there is no real unifying candidate to rally behind. Many of these candidates are divisive in their own way. So what do you think the international community could do? If not the international community, where is a solution?
Well, as it has been mentioned, it is clear that the problem right here is the government of DRC. Even during the electoral campaign, we've seen the government still using violence. We had Martin Fayulu, the candidate of whom we support, a campaign being disturbed by police officers using tear gas, water cannon, and shooting at people who are simply attending the campaign of an opposition figure. What we've also seen the government, the governor of the city of Kinshasa yesterday suspending the electoral campaign in the city of Kinshasa at a time where the opposition figure, Martin Fayulu, was supposed to hold his meeting. So even if the campaign is not free, the government is doing everything to control this process and limit people's ability to express themselves freely. And the signs are not good. And we've given them 5 years, they've not done anything.
Right.
We've given them 2 years. It's still not enough.
That we understand.
are continuing to see violence on the ground. We are continuing to see oppression on the ground.
We know your position on that.
At some point, the international community will.
At some point,
the international community will have to intervene, and if they don't intervene, at some point being now, because we can't really waste any more time. This violence, the risk of violence, as it has been pointed out, of greater violence, because there's already violence on the ground, is real. If we don't do anything now, the situation is going to get worse, because what we're seeing is Kabila is determined to stay in power and is using every means necessary to stay in power, including killing innocent civilians who simply want change in DRC.
Okay, so Vava, let me ask you then, I mean, in the shorter term here, if this election doesn't happen, or even if it does happen and it is deemed to be non-transparent or rigged or anything else, there are grave fears over the regional implications of any kind of violence or more instability breaking out in the DRC. What is your greatest fear in that respect?
My greatest fear is what's going to happen to nearly 80 million people. That's an entire country we are talking about. Look, I mentioned Kasai before. Kasai has been ransacked by this government, and the man who was responsible of the police and the army when Kasai was being ransacked is actually Emmanuel Ramazani Shadari, who, Kabila's cousin, who's being pushed forward to be his replacement. And that gives you an idea what's going to happen to our people. So Kasai is one of those places. We need to ask ourselves what's going to happen to that people, because they have already expressed that they are against this regime. What's going to happen in Benin? What's going to happen to pro-democracy movement in that country, in Congo? I mean, the reason Congo has been in such a crisis partially because of democratic or legitimacy issues. And this is a people who are pushing and standing and calling on the world, look, we want to become a democracy. We want to move forward. Give us a push. And the world continue to fail the Congolese people. And the only way forward now, there is no other excuse. If we do not support a civilian transition without any politicians, led by a neutral figure, Denis Mukwege or even Mosengo, then we have no other excuse. That is essentially us saying, Kabila, stay in power and kill as many people as you want. It's as simple as that.
And Kambali Musa Vuli, I imagine you're somewhat on the same page as Vava there, but tell me, if you can, what the fears are of the potentially impending instability, again, spilling over regional borders.
Well, I'll differ a bit. The reason why I'll differ, I think that we're forgetting the agency of the Congolese people. The reason why we're even discussing the election, if it wasn't for the Congolese people themselves putting pressure on the Kabila regime, we wouldn't even be having a discussion around that. And they have showed tremendous courage by hitting the streets. When you're looking at the campaign rallies of the opposition leaders, thousands of Congolese are coming in support of the opposition candidates who are campaigning for president. It's clearly a statement to me that the Congolese people as a whole want a new beginning, regardless of who's going to lead them, that they're just clear that they will not want the current regime. But on the way forward, I think that's what's very important, because we were discussing, so what's the way forward? Is it SADC? Is it the international community? I will continue to insist that the Congolese people have actually latched on to this opportunity. They know that we may not have elections this Sunday, December 23rd, but they are mobilizing for it. At the same time as I'm making this statement, reports that military deployment is happening in Kinshasa, in Goma. So the people are seeing that. The international community is bearing witness to that as well. So while the Congolese are going to mobilize and organize to have a new leadership in the country, they depend on those who are outside of the Congo to shine light on the issue, so that whenever the people are being shot on Sunday, the media can cover it, pressure can be put on Kabila, and of course, Kabila has to step away, and the election has to be organized way differently with a transition.
Okay.
That I am in agreement with, but for the leader, it's up to the Congolese people to choose who's going to lead them for the years to come.
Kambale Musabuli, I will have to give you the last word because unfortunately we are completely out of time for this segment of the Newsmakers. I'd like to thank all three of our panelists so much for joining us. Still to come, we look at the tug of war within Sri Lanka's government. And we ask why the Belgian Prime Minister has been forced to resign. Well, it seems Sri Lanka has gone back to the future. Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe was sacked by President Maithripala Sirisena 2 months ago. Now he's been sworn back into office. Then moments later, the same president that swore him in publicly accused him of corruption. It's a back and forth suggesting the country's political crisis is far from over. The president himself now faces a backlash from defecting ministers who are trying to limit his power. So how can Sri Lanka's government get on with the work of the people? Haider Abbasi has more.
Sri Lanka's president did everything he could to get rid of this man. In October, he sacked Ranil Wickremesinghe as Prime Minister. But Wickremesinghe refused to budge. Then President Maithripala Sirisena dissolved Parliament. But last week, Sri Lanka's Supreme Court ruled the move unconstitutional. And now Wickremesinghe has been sworn into office again by the very man who fired him.
As a country, we all have to be joyful, and we have to celebrate the fact that we have an authentic, independent judiciary that has acted as a check on the power of the executive.
The sacking of Wickremesinghe triggered a crisis and chaos in Parliament. Although he's back in office, it's unlikely to resolve the dispute. And Sirisena remains unrepentant. So why is the president determined to be rid of his prime minister? Both men had been in a coalition since winning elections in 2015. But the alliance slowly crumbled. The reasons are both personal and political. The president and prime minister disagree over economic policy. Sirisena was unhappy that Wickremesinghe wanted to sell state assets to foreign companies. And when Sirisena was elected, he said he'd be a one-term president. But now he says he'll run again. This frustrated Wickremesinghe, who's believed to have his eye on the presidency. Sirisena is also accused of encouraging a no-confidence vote against Wickremesinghe in April. Relations between the coalition partners worsened after local elections in February. They suffered humiliating losses to Mahinda Rajapaksa's party. And it was former President Rajapaksa that Sirisena had chosen to replace Wickremesinghe. Rajapaksa is popular and controversial. He's most well known for winning the 26-year civil war against separatist Tamil rebels. But his government is accused of killing thousands of civilians. When Sirisena defeated Rajapaksa in elections 3 years ago, he promised to investigate allegations of war crimes. But the president's been accused of moving too slowly. So with such differences between the Prime Minister and President, is another crisis inevitable? Haider Abbasi, The Newsmakers.
Let's cross to Colombo now, and we are joined by Malinda Rajapaksa. He is the spokesman for the former Defense Secretary Gotabaya Rajapaksa and a member of the Sri Lanka People's Front Party. We are also joined by journalist and political commentator Rasika Jayakudi. Thanks both so much for joining us. Rasika, let me start with you. Is this arrangement with Sirisena as president and Wickremesinghe as prime minister, is it doomed to fail? And if so, is there another alternative?
The political crisis in Sri Lanka has somewhat eased with the appointment of Ranil Wickremesinghe as the prime minister. There's at least a legal prime minister and a legal government in the country that commands the majority support in parliament. So that's a relief for many people. The issue, however, is far from being resolved. President Sirisena is still hostile towards the prime minister and his party, the UNP, and the tensions were clearly manifested in the speech by the president after the appointment of the new prime minister. However, the new cabinet was appointed today, this morning. The president and the prime minister managed to pull it off together. We hear, however, that the differences of opinion between the president and the UNP over some names delayed the appointment of a new cabinet. We also hear that the president has axed some members from the list of cabinet ministers at the last moment due to his personal reasons. So there are signs that the issue is still very much alive. And there are multiple indications to suggest that it's going to be a tough ride for the UNP. They have to run the government in an effective manner with a seemingly hostile president who has officially sided himself with the opposition. And this seems to be a serious challenge. However, the UNP seems confident that they can overcome this challenge.
Okay. Melinda, I mean, Rasika was saying that this political crisis now looks to be easing, improving, while we've heard others say it really marks the beginning of something worse to come. Where do you stand?
It's very important to understand where the crisis began. The crisis, the new political crisis of Sri Lanka is not something which started 1 month ago. That has been happening and showing different signals to people for almost last 3 years. When President Sirisena won the election, he appointed then UNP, now UNP leader, Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe as the prime minister. But from that day onwards, there was so many undemocratic processes happen within the parliament and outside the parliament. Elections were postponing for years. The most importantly, the local government council election was postponed almost more than 2 years. Then the provincial council election is already postponed for more than 1 year. Then some bills were passed in the parliament in a very forceful manner, if you really look at how that happened. And some of the debates in the parliament were blocked. And even the opposition leader position was not given to the joint opposition. It was given to another party. So there were many issues people were facing. And if you really look at the democracy was facing, so that was the crisis. Why we had to walk in 1 month ago, and Mr. Mahinda Rajapaksa had to take over the premiership to find a solution for this existing crisis. That is what President Sirisena spoke at his speech. He was clearly told he negotiated with Prime Minister Wickremesinghe to solve those problems, but no one supported him. Then he discussed with the other leaders of the UNP to solve this issue. No one supported him. So he left with the only solution of inviting Mahinda Rajapaksa and his team to again get into the premiership. And of course, then all work together towards dissolving the parliament, because that is what we all believe in, going back to the people and get a fresh mandate and then see how we are going to govern the country.
Okay, but that's
in this kind of crisis, what we believe that is very, very important, we go back to the source of the power, the people of the country, and get a fresh mandate from them and ask from them who should be governing the country, in which way, under which policies.
But because dissolving the parliament, according to so many, was actually in violation of the Constitution.
Yeah, that is what we realized. So that is why we got back from the government. That is why Mahinda Rajapaksa resigned from the parliament and allowed President Sirisena to continue the government with UNP government,
so now
where the cabinet was appointed this morning. But we gave a try. We worked on behalf of people, and we tried our best to give an opportunity for people to give a fresh mandate.
Okay.
Unfortunately, which didn't work out.
Go ahead, Rasika.
Yes, so we have to understand how this crisis occurred. Yes, as Melinda said, it didn't happen overnight. But President Sirisena and Prime Minister Wickremesinghe came to power on the promise of delivering good governance and transparency. That was the foundation of their mandate. They carried out certain reforms but backtracked on several key promises, such as the total abolition of executive presidency and post-conflict accountability. President Sirisena especially took control of the SLFP and got engaged in toxic party politics without being the neutral executive president he promised to be. Now, when he ran for the election in January 2015, he promised to be a neutral president who will usher in reforms. But that did not happen. Within just a few days, he became the leader of the Sri Lanka Freedom Party and started engaging in party politics.
Okay.
So as a result, over the past 5 years, the relationship between the president and the UNP turned bitter and hostile. Now, Melinda talked about postponing elections. Now, the person who was in charge of holding elections was Mr. Faisal Mustafa, who was a member of the Sri Lanka Freedom Party led by President Sirisena. Even at this point, the man who was personally overlooking the electoral process is with President Sirisena. The UNP did not oppose holding provincial council elections. So this argument does not have hold water because the President Sirisena, who is responsible.
I mean, taking up from Rasika, this is very important to understand when you look at the new existing crisis of the country. This history is very important. Now, when the presidential election came in 2015, which President Rajapaksa decided to have the presidential election 2 years in advance, because at that time he thought we have to again check the people's mandate. Even though he had 2 years to run, he decided to go for the election and see what people want to see. That is how the democracy works. But at that time, unfortunately, UNP hijacked the General Secretary of President Rajapaksa's party, where we all belong to.
Let me ask you something else, though. I don't want to. I mean, the politics are obviously extremely complicated. I mean, there are even accusations that Ranil Wickremesinghe and his allies paid for MPs to vote no confidence against Mahinda Rajapaksa. Just allegations that we've heard, obviously nothing proven. But let me ask you, please, where this leaves the Sri Lankan people at this point. I mean, it seems to prove that, first of all, there are no real friends in politics. People present themselves as rivals, and then ideologically or otherwise, and then only to become allies again when it serves their political interests. So where does that leave the people of Sri Lanka? Do they have any real trust in their leaders right now? Rasika, let me ask you as an analyst.
You have to look at it in the current context. I mean, people were sort of frustrated with the recent political crisis. They needed a stable government in the country. I mean, the political crisis broke out not because the ruling party didn't have a majority in parliament, because the president, the executive president, did not like the prime minister. It's a personal issue, as we understand. So the first priority of the new government is to find money to meet the government expenses for the next financial year. So the new finance minister will present a vote on account to parliament tomorrow in this regard. So that will be some sort of a relief for the public, because they want their salaries paid. I mean, that's the first requirement. But going forward, however, UNP may run into constant clashes with the president due to strong differences of opinion between the two groups. And this is why the UNP has to decide how the party is going to deal with the president and avert the recurrence of a political crisis next year. Otherwise, there will be no political stability in the country, no foreign investments will come, and the economy will not move ahead. So these are the things that the UNP must take into serious consideration. The people, from the point of view of the people, they need stability, but the stability is something that all political parties should work towards.
Right.
And also, I must respond to Melinda's argument about elections. Yes, elections are necessary for democracy, but also you have to respect the mandate you get from previous elections. Now, in 2015 August, people voted the UNP into power for a period of 5 years. So you have to respect that mandate. You have to respect the timelines. The elections should not be manipulated to suit the political agendas of certain political parties. That's not how a democracy functions.
I mean, Melinda, do you accept that argument?
No, I think the democracy of this country was brutally attacked when the 19th Amendment was passed at that time. The 19th Amendment says that you can't dissolve the parliament, or the president can't dissolve the parliament before, or otherwise 2/3 willingness is needed to dissolve the parliament. If parliament is to dissolve before 4.5 years. Now the problem, that is where the problem comes in. When countries not moving forward, when the people's mandate, which was given before, is not respected, when the country is going through a real political crisis due to the different clashes between the political parties and especially the leadership of the government, we saw very clearly President and Prime Minister were not working together. That has created so many issues in other ministries, and also the governance and also the administration of the government. In that kind of situation, it's very important, from the name of the democracy, you give people an opportunity to give a fresh mandate. And now that has been blocked. Now when that has been blocked, you left with the same people, you left with the same old routine, you left with the same old parliament to govern or run or administer the country. Now that is where the problem is. Now, even though Prime Minister Wickremesinghe sworn in and the new cabinet was appointed, the real issue started again. Now again, President is not supporting the government, and the parliament doesn't have any faith on the President. So this issue will not take us anywhere. Okay,
Rasika.
That is something we have to solve.
Melinda, I'm going to have to interrupt you. We're very, unfortunately, completely out of time for this segment, and I would like to thank you both for joining us so much on this edition of the Newsmakers.
I have to respect and take note of that situation. I'm taking the decision to offer my resignation, and my intention is to meet the king immediately.
Well, for the Belgian Prime Minister, it seems that signing a UN migrant deal was akin to a political death certificate. Charles Michel lost a vote of no confidence after members of a Flemish nationalist party abandoned his coalition government. The draft accord set a path to open up legal migration and manage the global flow of 250 million people. And though it was approved by a majority of parliamentarians, it still ultimately cost Michel his job. Let's speak to our guests now in Brussels. I'm joined by writer and political philosopher Bleri Leshi and journalist Sotiri Dimponodis. Thanks both so much for joining us. Bleri, let me begin with you. Let's first be clear that Prime Minister Charles Michel was struggling well before he signed off on that UN migration pact. Still, did he deserve to lose a no-confidence vote?
Yes, definitely. Actually, before they formed the government, Michel said himself that he would never form a government with the Flemish nationalist political party, NVA, and we as political analysts knew that it was going to be a tough ride, and well, after 4 years and a half, after having many disagreements, they couldn't finish their term, so the government fell apart, and now we have a government which is in current affairs.
Okay, so Thierry, are you on the same page there at least?
Yeah, basically I'm on the same page.
Okay, I mean, you don't think Charles Michel was fit for purpose in the case of Prime Minister?
No, but he could handle the situations much different than it was.
What were the big mistakes he made?
Not listening to the people. He didn't listen to the Belgian people. He didn't listen to them.
Okay, I mean, because some are saying, so Thierry, I'll stay with you. I mean, it seemed like Charles Michel was trying to be a centrist of sorts that could somehow manage to please parties on the right and on the left. But as is in the case of many countries around the world now, there is not much of a place for centrist politics in Belgium.
There is place for centrist politics, but he didn't listen to the people. There was a poll recently come out around 3 weeks ago. 8,300 people voted if they wanted to sign the Marrakesh agreement. 6,000 of them said no, we don't want to sign it, and the other 2,500 said yes, we want to sign it.
Okay.
So he had to hold a referendum on it.
Larry, is that fair? Did it come down to the Marrakesh agreement then in many ways? I mean, I know we were just saying that he had problems long before he signed off on that pact, but was that kind of the final nail in the coffin for him?
Look, I mean, we had a lot of talk on migration in Belgium as elsewhere in Europe and in the world, but actually specifically on the pact that we are discussing, the pact was already signed in September. I mean, this was non-issue for Belgium, but it was after the NVA, this political party, which is the biggest political party on the Flemish side, actually saw countries such as Poland, such as Hungary, such as Austria, Netherlands, Denmark. They saw that they were willing to go against this pact, and they said, you know what, we want to move along with them because there are important elections coming up next year. So, I mean, this was a total irresponsible move from NVA. But the bigger problem that I had with this government is not true that it is a centrist government or it has centrist policies. I mean, if you look at the policies, if we analyze them, we are speaking about right policies. We are speaking actually in terms of issues such as migration. I could easily say, as some other analysts say, extreme right policies. If we look, for example, at the previous Minister of Migration and Asylum, we had recently, just behind me, we had 5,500 extreme right people coming to protest against this pact. It was the previous minister till 2 weeks ago who actually encouraged these people from extreme right movements to go on the streets and to protest against the pact. So we have a clear connection between this political party and extreme right. So it is not correct to say that we are talking about centrist policies. And one extra thing I would like definitely to add is this one. I think this is a clear strategy actually for NVA, but also for this government to do not speak of the real problems that this country is suffering from. Do not speak of the poverty which is rising. Do not speak of the unemployment which is rising. Do not speak of the climate problems and so on. Of the minimum of the age for the pension and so on. So they don't want these issues to come on the agenda because they know their results are very negative, and what they want to do is they want to stick to this only one issue, the issue of migration, till the next elections. And I think this country deserves much better than only talking on migration.
So Thierry, that is many analysts, to be fair, take on the situation in Belgium right now, that it is a minority right wing that has made it look like migration is the single most important issue to Belgians right now, when it actually is not. We've seen protests in Belgium break out over exactly what Larry was saying. The cost of living has gotten too high. There are fundamental problems of basic existence in Belgium right now, but that the right wing is capitalizing on this migration issue in a way that's blown it too far out of proportion and taken the attention away from the issues that really matter to Belgians.
Yeah, I know, but if you look at the protests on Sunday, they didn't protest against the migration pact only. They protested against a lot of policies because if you take a lot of migration in your country, the poverty level will go higher, the crimes will go higher, and the all-around situation in Belgium will go higher. So it's not an easy thing to do, but it has to be done. The government needs to listen to his people.
Okay. Go ahead, Larry. If you disagree, tell me why. I'm trying to figure out what the disconnect is between your two visions of Belgium right now.
I agree and disagree. First, I disagree on the fact that they were protesting for other issues. I mean, this is totally not true. The message was clear of this march. It was supposed to be a march, and it was the march against Marrakesh, meaning the Pact of Marrakesh. So that is one thing. The other thing is, it is true that we have bigger problems in this country, as I mentioned. And I'm not saying that only migrants are having problems. Also, white people in Belgium, else white people all over Europe are having a hard time. And it's really important to recognize those problems. And the governments, and I agree there with Sotiris, that should acknowledge these problems. But politicians and government shouldn't be putting different groups against each other. And this is what is happening right now. We see how, for example, lower classes of white people are being set up against refugees or against migrants, as being the refugees or migrants coming and invading our countries, raping our women, taking our jobs, profiting from our system, and so on and so on. But when we look at the figures, this is not true. I can give you an example. I recently went to give a lecture somewhere, and I asked the audience how many refugees came previous year into our country. And the answers were 100,000, 300,000, and one of the answers was 1.3 million refugees. Actually, the answer was 20,000 refugees. So if you have these people who think they have 1.3 million refugees coming yearly into their country, I mean, I understand that they are afraid. I understand that they see refugees and migration as a problem. But this is not true. The question is, why do they think that? And the answer actually is very obvious. I have quotes from Vice Prime Minister of this country, from ministers saying that we are being invaded, that all of them are coming here, and so on. So it is a discourse actually which makes people afraid.
Okay. So Thierry, I can see you disagree. If you'd like to comment on that quickly, go ahead before I get to a final issue.
Look, we are a very hospitality country. We welcome refugees everywhere from all around the country, but it needs to be legal migration, not illegal migration, because people cannot go and cross the border just in thin air. That is not possible anymore. We need to regulate the borders.
Okay. I see you two won't agree on that issue, but let me ask something that's pretty specific to Belgium. About a decade ago, there were real fears that the country might actually break apart. The Flemish-speaking regions versus the French-speaking regions. It seemed at the time that the only issue they had in common was that they had to share Brussels, and there was no way to find a final agreement on how to divide the capital city. Do you fear that kind of division is back in Belgium and that discussion will start again? Go ahead, Larry.
Yeah, I think there is one thing about the people and one thing about politicians. So I would agree on what Sotiris said, that we are, I mean, we live in a country which is hospitable to refugees and migrants, but we have politicians actually which show different discourse, different ideas from the citizens. And exactly also on your question, it is the very same. I mean, we had this, what are we going to do with the country? Are we going to split up and so on? This is an issue for 30% of Flemish people, only Flemish people. So it's not an issue for the majority of Flemish people. It's not an issue for the majority, the huge majority of Belgian people. And let me be clear on that. I mean, this country will not split because they just don't know what to do with Brussels. I mean, Flanders without Brussels is nothing. Wallonia without Brussels is nothing. So I mean, this is the paradox of this country, but at the same time also what makes unique this country and what makes us proud to be from Brussels, being part of this Belgian absurdity.
Okay, so Thierry, do you also agree that there is ultimately a sense of unity among Belgians?
Yes, we as a Belgian country are united. Flemish or Walloons, we are always united.
Well, if I
took an example. took an example like the World Cup. We were united as one.
Okay, the World Cup is rather special, but I mean, if I speak to a member of the NVA party, the Flemish Nationalist Party, we're not going to hear the same answer, are we?
I don't know. You have to tell them, not me.
Okay. Go ahead, Larry.
Well, no, I mean, yes. Well, within the NVA, you have people who would say that they want an independent Flanders. Definitely, you have that. But within the NVA, you have also other people actually who are just fine with this federal model, and as they want as many, as much as autonomy as possible. And they have been getting actually more and more autonomy. I mean, on the level of region and communities. Okay. So this is again, it's not a typical Belgian issue. I mean, these are issues that we are seeing all over Europe, all over the world, and actually, and this is really important to realize. They need to mask what are the real problems of people. Let me tell you that in this city, where 1 out of 3 people lives in poverty and 40% of the children live in poverty, people are not busy with are they going to be part of Flanders, Wallonia, or Belgium. People want solutions for the poverty, for the social exclusion, want better jobs, and so on. And I think this is what we need politicians and governments for.
Unfortunately, I'm going to have to cut you off there because we are completely out of time for this segment of the Newsmakers. Thanks both so much for joining us. That's all for this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Andrea Sankey. Check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Remember to like, follow, and subscribe. Until next time, thanks for watching. Goodbye.